You were taught how to survive reality long before anyone asked you what kind of reality you wanted to live in. Think about that for a second. From the moment you were old enough to understand instructions, most of what you heard was about adapting. Be careful, be realistic, get good grades, find something stable, don't take unnecessary risks, make sure you can pay the bills, keep your expectations reasonable. And none of those things are evil. Some of them are useful. But slowly, almost invisibly, a strange idea gets planted inside you. Reality is something already finished, something solid, something outside you. Your job is simply to figure out how to fit yourself inside it without getting hurt. So you become good at reading the room. You learn when to speak and when to stay quiet. You learn how much money people like you are supposed to make, what kind of dreams sound sensible, how confident you're allowed to be before someone calls you unrealistic. You learn to measure possibility using evidence from yesterday. And after enough years, survival starts wearing the costume of wisdom. You call fear being practical. You call hesitation thinking things through. You call a life that doesn't really fit you just how life is. Meanwhile, somewhere underneath all that conditioning, another part of you keeps whispering, there has to be more than this. And maybe that whisper is why you're here. Because some part of you already knows you weren't given imagination merely to entertain yourself when reality becomes unbearable. You weren't given the ability to envision, choose, focus, desire, create and rethink your life just so you could become a better prisoner of circumstances. Your mind isn't only a window through which you observe the world, it's also a workshop. And once you understand that, a more uncomfortable question appears. If your life keeps repeating patterns you don't want, how much of what you call reality is actually a pattern you've unknowingly continued creating? Most cages don't look like cages when you've lived inside them long enough. Some look like routines. Some sound like family advice. Some feel like common sense. You wake up, think familiar thoughts, move through familiar emotions, make familiar choices, and then wonder why tomorrow looks suspiciously like yesterday. Nothing dramatic has to be holding you back. There doesn't need to be some giant enemy standing between you and the life you want. Sometimes the strongest wall is simply a sentence you've repeated so often that you stopped hearing it. That's just who I am. People like me don't do that. Money is hard to make. Relationships always end badly. I'm not disciplined. I'm not creative. I've never been lucky. Repeat a sentence long enough, and eventually you stop treating it as a thought. You start treating it as architecture. Those invisible structures are what the transcript calls paradigms, deeply rooted mental programs that shape habitual behavior. A paradigm isn't merely something you believe intellectually. It's closer to the hidden operating system beneath your daily choices. You can consciously say you want freedom, while unconsciously repeating behaviors that produce confinement. You can want abundance while expecting loss. You can want love while interpreting every uncertain moment as rejection. You can want a different future while making every decision according to what happened in the past. And because so much human behavior is habitual, the pattern can run almost automatically. You don't wake up each morning and deliberately choose the old life. You simply keep choosing from the same internal menu. Picture someone walking through a house in complete darkness. After years of bumping into the same furniture, they become incredibly skilled at avoiding pain. 3 steps forward, turn slightly, reach for the table, duck near the shelf. Eventually they can move through the room almost perfectly. Someone watching might even be impressed. But survival has an interesting weakness. Becoming excellent at navigating darkness can make you forget that you're allowed to turn on the light. Much of what you call your personality may simply be a collection of adaptations. Ways you learn to stay safe. Ways you learn to be accepted. Ways you learn not to fail publicly, not to disappoint anyone, not to reach for something that might expose you to uncertainty. which is why changing your life often feels harder than learning something new. You aren't merely adding information, you're challenging an identity that has spent years proving itself correct. Old paradigms will defend themselves using logic. Be realistic, wait until you're ready. What if it doesn't work? Who do you think you are? Logic can be useful, but logic built on an old assumption can only build a more sophisticated version of the old world. Eventually you have to ask something different, not what does my current reality allow me to become, but what kind of person would naturally create the reality I want? And right there, the conversation moves from surviving your circumstances to understanding the instrument that has been shaping them all along: your attention. Attention seems ordinary because you use it every day, but it may be one of the most expensive things you own. Whatever repeatedly receives it begins occupying more space inside your mind. Think about what happens after buying a certain kind of car. Suddenly you see that model everywhere. Those cars didn't magically appear overnight. Your mind simply became tuned to notice what had become significant. Something similar happens with opportunity, rejection, scarcity, possibility, betrayal, creativity, and fear. Your mind is constantly filtering an overwhelming world, deciding what deserves to become part of your conscious experience. What you repeatedly focus on becomes easier to notice, easier to feel, easier to interpret, and eventually easier to act upon. Now look at how most people use that power. They wake up and immediately rehearse what's wrong. Not enough money, not enough time, someone hasn't replied, something could go badly, the future feels uncertain. Then they carry those pictures around all day and wonder why their emotional state keeps matching them. Your thoughts influence how you feel, and feelings shape the state from which you respond to life. When you're mentally living inside defeat, your body doesn't care that the disaster exists only as an imagined possibility. Your shoulders tighten, your energy drops, your decisions become smaller. You notice evidence that confirms the mood you're already carrying. Soon you're no longer merely thinking about limitation, you're behaving from it. Here's where imagination becomes far more serious than daydreaming. Imagination allows you to hold a picture that your senses cannot yet confirm. That sounds simple, but almost every meaningful human creation begins there. Before a bridge exists, someone has to see a bridge where everyone else sees water. Before a business exists, someone has to see value where everyone else sees an empty room and a problem. Before a new version of your life exists, you have to become capable of seeing beyond your current evidence. Your senses report what already is. Imagination can introduce you to what could be. And if you only believe what your senses currently show you, then yesterday will keep getting the final vote on tomorrow. But there's a trap here. Imagining something once and then spending the next 16 hours rehearsing the opposite won't change much. Weak attention creates weak direction. Your mind needs a clear picture. Return to deliberately, not obsessively, but consistently. Maybe that means writing the goal somewhere you'll see it often. Maybe it means taking 5 quiet minutes in the morning and asking, what am I actually creating today? Maybe it means catching yourself mid-spiral when you begin imagining everything going wrong and choosing a different picture. Not pretending problems don't exist. Not whispering affirmations while the house is on fire. Something more mature than that. You acknowledge reality without giving it permanent authority. Because once attention stops feeding the old pattern, imagination can begin doing something survival never taught you how to do. Build an inner reality strong enough to guide new action. A goal is easy to misunderstand. Most people treat it like an object sitting somewhere in the future. More money, better health, a meaningful relationship, a different career, peace, freedom, a home, a creative life. And because the goal seems far away, they keep relating to it as something they don't have. Every time they think about it, the hidden message becomes, it's over there and you're still over here. Then they wait for circumstances to change before allowing themselves to think, feel, or act differently. But creation works in the opposite direction. You don't wait for the future to give you permission to become someone new. You begin becoming that person before the evidence arrives. Think of a radio. You can sit beside it all day, complaining that the music you want isn't coming through. But if the dial is tuned elsewhere, frustration changes nothing. You have to adjust the frequency. In human terms, that means changing the patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior you consistently occupy. Want confidence? Begin practicing the decisions confidence would make. Want a different financial life? Stop repeatedly rehearsing helplessness around money and start developing the skills, ideas, and value that can produce a different result. Want meaningful work? Stop treating your desire as childish just because your current environment doesn't understand it. You don't need to become delusional. You need to become internally congruent. Your direction, attention, and behavior have to stop fighting each other. Here's where dissatisfaction can become useful. Most people were taught that wanting more means being ungrateful. So they either feel guilty for wanting a different life or pretend to be satisfied with one that's slowly draining them. But gratitude and dissatisfaction aren't enemies. You can appreciate what exists while recognizing that something within you still wants expression. A seed doesn't insult the soil by becoming a tree. Growth doesn't mean the previous stage was worthless. Maybe the restlessness you feel isn't proof that something is wrong with you. Maybe some part of you has simply outgrown the identity that once kept you safe. Desire can become a signal. Not every impulse deserves to be followed, of course, but the deeper desires, the ones that keep returning even after you've tried to bury them, often point toward unused parts of yourself. And eventually there comes a moment when understanding isn't enough. You have to decide. Decisions are powerful because they interrupt the negotiation with your old identity. Not a dramatic promise made at midnight and forgotten by morning. A real decision. This pattern ends here. This is what is being built now. This is who you are becoming. Old habits may still appear. Fear may still speak. The world may continue showing you evidence from choices you made months or years ago. Fine. A ship doesn't arrive in a new country the moment the captain changes direction. There's still ocean to cross. But direction matters. Keep steering. Keep returning your attention to the picture you've chosen. Keep taking actions that agree with it. And slowly, almost quietly at first, your external life begins reflecting something that changed long before anyone else could see it. You were trained to look at reality and ask, what am I allowed to do from here? Maybe it's time to reverse the question. Ask, what do I want to create, and who must I become to create it? Look closely at your life without shame and without excuses. Your finances, your relationships, your health, your habits, your use of time, your attention. Don't look to condemn yourself. Look to understand the pattern. Then choose one picture worth holding, one direction worth committing to. Give it attention. Give it imagination. Give it disciplined action. When the old voice says, be realistic, remember that reality is often nothing more than yesterday's thinking hardened into today's circumstances. You're allowed to respect what exists without worshipping it. So stop living like a visitor inside your own life. Stop waiting for the world to become safe enough, certain enough, or approving enough before you finally become who you already know you could be. Your attention is yours. Your imagination is yours. Your decisions are yours. Use them. Build something with them. Maybe the first thing you create won't be a business, a fortune, a relationship, or some extraordinary new life. Maybe the first thing you create is simply a new way of seeing yourself. And perhaps that's where every real transformation begins, when you stop asking how to survive the reality in front of you and finally decide to become one of the forces shaping what comes next.